Okay, so I think we're broadcasting. Let me do a little bit of social media. Okay, so I'm a few minutes early. I'm going to start in just a few minutes, and we'll see if we're going to have anyone show up, because that is the real question. Is anyone going to actually show up and ask questions? If not, that's fine. I'll get my hour back. So we'll give it just a couple of minutes. Let me just double check that I'm actually broadcasting. Okay, looks like it. Looks like I'm broadcasting. All right. So we'll just give it a couple of minutes. Another minute to go. I hope everybody's good out there. I'm in a slightly different location. I'm at the X Prize office in Los Angeles. So I've been here all week. It's my third week. So I said I'd come in full time for my first week, and then I come in full time for my third week as well. And then ordinarily I'll be working from home from the usual scene that some of you folks see every week. Ian says, indeed, it does look like it. Yes, there's a lovely whiteboard here. This is actually kind of a boring looking room to be completely honest with you. So we'll see. All right. So it's 11 o'clock. Let me just give it another minute, and then we'll see about getting started. One thing that I think might affect this week's videocast is the fact that first of all, I promoted this fairly late on because I've been here all week, and secondly, the date and time was wrong at one point, so my apologies about that. For those of you who are joining from jonobacon.org/live, you definitely want to go to that page because there's a little chat box, and you can log in with basically choose a nickname, and then that's the way in which you can ask questions. So make sure you go to John O. Bacon, that's JONOBACON.org/live, and that's where you can log in and you can ask your questions. I can see some people logging in right now. All right, so why don't we get started? Hi everyone, my name is John O. Bacon. I work at X Prize as the X Prize Senior Director of Community, and I also used to work as the Community Manager for Ubuntu at Canonical. I'm really super passionate about building strong and powerful communities all over the world. I think that when we get together to achieve grand visions, anything is possible. We've seen this countless times over the years. For my technical friends out there, a great example of this, of course, is Linux. It started out with one guy, Linus Torvalds, who had this idea to create a piece of software that was missing. And a community grew up around Linux, and it has fundamentally changed how infrastructure works in the world. The world is running on Linux. Another example of this is Wikipedia. Jimmy Wales had this vision of why don't we document all human knowledge in one place, and that's changed the way in which kids do their homework and how we learn about the world. It's also resulted in hours and hours of me wasting time just browsing and learning about random things. And then, of course, we've seen significant political change as well. Things like the Arab Spring would have been possible if it weren't for communities getting together. So, I used to do like a weekly Q&A every week with Ubuntu, and I'd promote this across the Ubuntu social media networks, and people come and ask me a bunch of questions about Ubuntu. The purpose of this is really just to invite people to come and ask questions about anything. So if you want to ask questions about community management, or if you want to ask my views on Ubuntu, or if you want to ask about X Prize, or anything to do with open source or technology or politics, everything is completely welcome. So how does this work? It's very simple. All you need to do is type the word question in capital letters or uppercase, and I will go through the questions one by one and answer them. Obviously, this whole session is really pretty dependent on having questions. So if there's no questions, we'll wrap it up early. If there are questions, I'm happy to answer anything. Now, to be very clear, you can ask absolutely anything. I don't want anyone to feel like they can't ask a certain question. Literally, feel free to ask absolutely anything that you want, okay? So again, make sure that you go to johnobacon.org/live and log into the chat room, because I know some of you may be watching this on Google+, and then that's the way in which you can ask the questions. So get your questions in. While you get any questions in, I just want to talk about a couple of things that have been going on recently. So an event that I organize every year is called the Community Leadership Summit. I started this about 6 years ago as my goal here is I want to kind of grow the art and science of how we build great communities, and there's lots of different ways of doing that, but I've always believed that the way in which we enhance science and art, and the way in which we enhance professions, is to get people together to share and learn from each other. So, there was many pieces to this. I wanted to write a book, The Art Community, but I also wanted to organize a conference, the Community Leadership Summit. So if you go to communityleadershipsummit.com, you can find out more about it. It's basically going to be kicking off on the 18th and 19th of July in Portland, Oregon. And there's various other people who have expressed an interest in organizing similar events. So one of the things that I've been discussing recently is the notion of taking the spirit of the Community Leadership Summit, like the format and how that works, and organizing local events. So imagine you have a similar event in Boston, or you have a similar event in Paris, or you have a similar event in London, wherever it might be. So we've been kicking around the idea of this and calling these events CLSX, kind of inspired by TED do some things similar. They have their TED events, and then they have TEDx, which are like the local regional ones. So the way in which I'd like this to work is I created a CLSX license, which is basically a document that highlights how one of these events would work, right? So these are the key pieces of what would go into a CLSX event. So, for example, certain expectations. For example, you can't call an event CLSX unless you've been offered one of these licenses. We won't. The Community Leadership Summit doesn't provide sponsorship or organizational logistical equipment, things like that. So just setting some expectations, but also things like defining event requirements, like the event has got to be free, and it must be accessible and open to everybody, and the event must observe the anti-harassment policy, and that the event and associated social events must adhere to local laws and regulations, things like that. So some of those things are fairly obvious, but then also some more specific pieces. So for example, if you want to run a CLSX event, we require you to have a web page that outlines the event, the location, and the date, travel details of how to get there, an overview of what the event is and what it covers, things like that. But also a regular stream of marketing around how you do social media, blog posts, videos, and things like that. So the goal here is that what it does is it really kind of sets the stage for again, the spirit of what one of these events should be. And we can go through, one by one and make sure that each of these things kind of, it kind of brings the spirit of what CLS is to the local area. I think there is an enormous opportunity here to build a global network of these events. So this is one of the reasons why I wanted to kind of put this format together. So I founded this forum called the Community Leadership Forum. If you go to communityleadershipforum.com, you can find it, and it's basically a forum designed for community managers and leaders to get together and talk about how to build strong and powerful communities. So it's on there. So I'd like to invite each of you to go and take a look at that. I know Michael Hall, who I used to work with at Canonical, he's taken a look and he's provided some input on that, which is awesome. So yeah, so that's basically one thing that's been going on. The Community Leadership Forum as well, I think, is really starting to take off. We've got some really great discussion happening there. So I'm pretty stoked with how that's looking. But yeah, everything's looking pretty good. So no questions, really, people? We've got no questions whatsoever? This is going to be a very short session. I think my snafu of the timing maybe has affected this session. So get your questions in. If you don't have any questions, we'll wrap this right up, and everything will be shorter than expected. There's one of the things that's interesting, of course, when I used to do this with the with Ubuntu, I'd post about, oh, we're going to have the weekly Q&A, and of course, when you post about something like that to 1 million people on Facebook, at least seemingly to 1 million people on Facebook, then by definition you get 50 or 60 people showing up. So so it's interesting. So I think one thing that I've been thinking about recently about these weekly, because I like the idea of doing like a weekly video cast, is I'm thinking what I might do is, instead of just doing a Q&A, maybe to do provide some content as well. So for example, to do a presentation about a particular topic, to talk about a particular topic, or to share some thoughts on a particular topic that might be of interest. Because I can imagine, like with Ubuntu, for example, the questions were very pointed, like, what are you guys doing about this? What are you guys doing about this? And I was in a good position to do that. But in my new position at XPRIZE, we haven't really kicked off the community pieces yet. So there's not a lot to ask about. And then there's the general community management piece, which, is a smaller audience of people. So we do have a question from Gareth. What are your initial goals in your new role at XPRIZE, both short-term and long-term? So, great question. There is definitely short-term and long-term goals here. So the short-term goals, sadly, I can't really talk about right now. I'm working on something that is currently company confidential that I'll be able to share more about later in the year. So yeah, I can't really talk a lot about that. So the majority of my work going on right now is on that, and that's something that will be announced later on. But I can definitely talk about some other short-term goals and some longer-term goals. So the short-term goals as well, frankly, for me, are just getting to know people and getting to know how the organization works. XPRIZE is very different to Canonical. Canonical was, well, it still is. It's not like it's not around anymore. Canonical is a software company. It moves really quick, right? A lifetime in Canonical is 6 months because you ship every 6 months. So everything is going at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And it's a little different at XPRIZE because things are going at 1,000,000 miles an hour, but the wider vessel of the work is a much longer term thing. So a typical XPRIZE lasts 3 to 6 years. It's a long time because what we're doing here is we really are focused on solving these major problems in the world. Like, for example, an example of this is the Qualcomm Tricorder XPRIZE. This is a prize to basically build technology that is cheap and affordable, that can sit in the palm of your hand, that will be able to diagnose a patient with what's wrong with them from a health perspective, without them, better than a board of physicians, of trained physicians. So the idea is that, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, your 18-month-old kid starts screaming. You go in and see what's wrong, and they've got fever, and they're not well, maybe they're throwing up, and you just don't know what to do. You're panicked, and you don't know whether to call a doctor, maybe you don't have access to a doctor. You should be able to have this device that is like a cell phone almost, and you should be able to have the kid, you can essentially use the device to determine what's wrong with the kid. And that can pull from lots of different angles, it could, spit and temperature, and they could cough onto it, whatever else. So, that's, to achieve that technologically, that's a lot of work. It's a huge amount of R&D needs to be done there. So that's the reason why these prizes take so long. To ship a new version of Ubuntu, the difference between one release and another release is relatively relatively small. The longer term vision of Ubuntu, of course, takes a long period of time. The convergence story, for example, is 2 or 3 years. So the pace of change here is the pace is different. It's both long term and very, very fast paced, which takes some getting used to. So that's short term. The longer term vision that I've got is I want XPRIZE to be the place where you can thoughtfully change the world, where anybody with passion has got the ability to have a profound impact in solving the major problems that we've got today. And a big chunk of this is opening the doors to how that works. So right now at XPRIZE, if you want to participate in XPRIZE, you can participate in a few different ways. So you can, if you're a wealthy, if you're a wealthy individual, you can obviously donate money, and this can pay for the prize. This can pay for the prize development as well as how the prizes are executed, and of course the prize purse. Because the way an XPRIZE works is, it's not like someone just sits in a boardroom like this and just says, you know what, why don't we go and find $15 million to solve this major world problem, and then they just go and get the money and throw it up on a website. The prize development process and prize design process is really intense. There's a lot involved in how these prizes work. This is something that was completely new to me when I joined. They have this notion of let's take the tricorder example. The tricorder example is, can we build something that is affordable that can essentially replace a doctor in terms of diagnosing you with different issues? So the prize design process involves looking at, okay, the next 5 years, based upon how technology is developing today, will the technology be available to do this? Is the hardware available? Is the software available? Is artificial intelligence going to be available at that point to be able to sufficiently diagnose people? But also, is there the opportunity for an industry to be built around this? Because the one thing that's consistent in the major technologies that solve the world's problems is it's not like a philanthropist pays $100 million to do something, and then that problem is solved. What needs to happen is industries need to form around those particular technologies to build competition that drives the prices down. So, what we really want when the tricorder is finished is we really want multiple companies building tricorders, because then what happens is they get better and they get cheaper and all the rest of it. So there is an assessment of the technology. Like XPRIZE hires consultants and experts to look at market data to see what kind of impact this is going to have on the world. So, for example, with the tricorder example, and I'm not an expert in this, but with the tricorder example, that technology, an affordable handheld device that can diagnose health issues, could have a profound impact on the world. A lot of people can't afford medical care. A lot of people just don't have access to medical care. If you live in the middle of nowhere or you live in a country that doesn't have adequate medical infrastructure, then this device could potentially save the life of your family. So we want to make sure that these prizes are having a really profound impact on the world as well. So that's the kind of the prize design and development process. What I want to do is, yes, today millionaires can contribute to XPRIZE, and then we have teams who, a team says, okay, I want to try and win this prize, and they get involved and they participate. But those teams kind of, if you're going to be in it to win an XPRIZE, like, this is a lot of work. This isn't just, spending your weekend building something. This is, many of these teams need investment. They need to raise money and investment to be able to participate in this. A good example of that is the Google Lunar XPRIZE, which is to create a vehicle that will be flown to the moon and send high definition video back from the moon. It's essentially democratizing space again, right? Like right now, space has always been the avenue of investigation for governments, and the Google Lunar XPRIZE seeks to kind of break that. And this is like a $30 million XPRIZE. So, you can't build that without investment. Like, I couldn't think to myself, I want to do that. I'd need to raise capital that I can use to, spin out the technology and things like that. So those are the current demographics that really engage with XPRIZE. What I want to do, and See Profit is asking this as well, like, what's the community vision for XPRIZE? How will it expand to local communities? I want to make sure that anybody who's got passion can be part of XPRIZE. So if you are if you're an advocate, right, just like the Ubuntu Loco teams, if you're an advocate and you're passionate about one of the problems that we're trying to solve, I mentioned the tricorder as the example, right? If you're passionate about bringing a better quality of life to people in terms of medical, in terms of how they manage their health and the health of their families, and putting affordable healthcare into the hands of people, if you're really passionate about that, but you don't have the ability or the time or the resources to form a team, I want there to be an avenue in for you to help XPRIZE. I want you to be able to be enabled so you can go out there and be an advocate for the prize and raise the awareness about it, and raise the awareness of the vision of XPRIZE. So, that's one example of that. But there's also ideas that have been thrown around, and something that I'm very interested in exploring at XPRIZE is how we can open up the prize development process. Like we should really be having anybody submitting ideas for prizes, right? Right now, there's kind of like a small set of people who are engaged in this. I want to build a world in which people with a great idea for a prize can engage with XPRIZE and how they do that. Things like, but to me, in doing that, just like with open source, that it can't be kind of cosmetic participation, right? If in my mind, if you have an idea for a prize, let's say that idea is a cure, something that will help with Alzheimer's or dementia, just having that idea is not enough, right? It needs to have the research and the background. It needs to be a compelling kind of case for investing in putting a prize like that together. So, I think there's so many areas in which we can do this, in how we have ideas for prizes, and how we do the prize development, in how prizes are funded, right? Crowdfunding could be an interesting model for this, for example, in how we can widen this out. Maybe we have large XPRIZes, maybe we have small XPRIZes. There's tons of different things that we could potentially do. Like I say, my kind of vision and my philosophy here is I want XPRIZE to be the way in which people can thoughtfully change the world. Because to be honest with you, anyone can have an idea, right? Anyone can have an idea for, I'd like to go and, cure poverty in a particular manner. I'd like to go and help people get cleaner access to water. I'd like to improve the quality of education in the world. I'd like to, I'd like to create a world in which illiteracy doesn't exist. But the thing about XPRIZE is that XPRIZE has become kind of like a recognized brand for organizing these competitions. So I want XPRIZE to be kind of almost like the rubber stamp of quality, that, yeah, if XPRIZE are doing it, then it's something serious. It makes sense. There's kudos behind it. So that's kind of the longer term vision. And, in the interest of openness and transparency, right now, I don't know how much of that I can achieve and do. I mean, the remit based upon my expectations of why I'm here is based upon the fact that we can do this, that we can infuse community into every part of the organization. That was something that Peter Diamandis told me very specifically. This is something that I want to achieve. But I'm conscious of the fact that I'm the new guy around here, and everyone, when anyone joins a company, they come with tons of ideas, right? Everyone has, like, wide-eyed visions and ideas. It's what's doable and how we do it and how we go about doing it, and that's what I'm figuring out right now. So, as with anyone who joins a company, I think it's always good to start out with shorter-term goals and do a really good job there, and then move forward with that. So another question that came in from C Profit is, how are things going in the transition? I think things are going really well. I mean, it's interesting because I haven't changed jobs in 7.5 years, so I'm kind of new at this change in jobs thing. And part of that is proclaim that I have all of the answers, right? I mean, this job was created for me, but this is an organization that is relatively unfamiliar with structured communities. I mean, we have people here who do social media, and there's small communities that are forming around XPRIZE. But the kind of community that we're familiar with in the open source world, in the maker world, is kind of new to the organization. So a lot of what I'm doing right now is just helping to kind of build bridges with people who I need to work with and help them to understand that I'm not a threat, and that there is the work that I'm doing is really very complementary to the work of other teams as well, and just helping to kind of get an understanding of the people and the culture and how things work, and that's basically what I'm doing right now. So the transition, I feel like, has been good. You know, there's been areas of frustration as the norm in my world and the norm in XPRIZE are not necessarily aligned, but I think that's perfectly normal when people change positions. But those frustrations have not been anything major. That's just what happens when you change jobs. So I'm pretty happy with how everything's going. We got a good step forward. There's a ton of opportunity. I mean, I believe that there is an opportunity here to really have a profound impact on the world, a significantly profound impact on the world. And you know what? I'm going to give it my damnedest best shot, and that's my view. So I'm really excited about the future. I'm really excited about the potential, and more of what I'll be doing will become visible as, you know, the pieces that I'm working on right now kind of get bashed from being kind of raw materials into something that I can present and we can talk about publicly. Folks, if you've got any other questions, please remember you can just type the word question in capital letters, and I'm happy to go through them. You know, again, kind of rebooting my weekly Q&As because they're a little different now. So I think next week, I'm gonna present some content. I think I'm gonna do a talk or a presentation about something, and then do some Q&A afterwards as well. So I appreciate everybody, you know, essentially restarting with me. This is a brand new experience again. It's kind of fun, you know, kickstarting my weekly Q&As again. A question from C Profit as well is, how realistic is the tricorder? Now, I'll be honest with you, I'm not an expert on the tricorder on the tricorder prize. From what I can tell, there's really great development going on. So there's another prize called the Nokia Sensing X Prize, which is essentially about building a bunch of sensors that cheap and effective sensors that can be used in a device such as a tricorder. From what I understand, the prize is actually going pretty well. You know, one thing that I'm learning about XPRIZE, of course, is that because these prizes take so long, right? They're like 3 to 5 years because they're significant pieces of engineering. You know, at Canonical, for example, when we do an Ubuntu release, you know, we release every 6 months. It gives you an opportunity every 6 months to kind of assess how you organize, you know, a project, how you run the team, and how you, you know, satisfy your stakeholders and all the rest of it, just from a project management perspective. Of course, at XPRIZE, the opportunity to do that is much less frequent because these prizes execute less frequently. So I think that what's happening is, you know, the prizes are kind of bit by bit are getting better managed and better organized. You know, I've seen this already. Like the Qualcomm TriXPRIZE is seen as kind of like the jewel in the crown right now for how XPRIZE is organizing these prizes. And the next prize that we're working on right now, which I can't share sadly, but is going to be super awesome, is being even more kind of effectively managed in that regard as well. And this next XPRIZE, which is really kind of my first big one, is also going to include, you know, a strong community component to it as well. So, you know, I think that, you know, the way in which these campaigns are being run and how visible they are and things like that is getting better and improving. So I know more about the tricorder, frankly, because I was reading about it before I came to XPRIZE. I thought it was really neat what they were doing. So, for example, there's this kid. I can't remember his name. There's this kid who was like, I saw an interview with him on the Daily Show a while back. Who, you know, he's like 16-year-old at the time. He was like 16 or 14 years old, and he invented in his bedroom, like basically you know, he's a science nerd, and he invented like a strip in his bedroom for testing pancreatic cancer, and it was something like 100 times more effective, and it was 300 times cheaper than the commercial options. You know, so he's basically a maker, right? He's for all intents and purposes a hardware hacker, a maker, and what he was doing was in his bedroom, he was creating technology that could be used in a tricorder. In fact, he's actually he's organized one of the teams that's working on the tricorder. Earlier this week, there was an announcement of someone's invented like a blood testing kit that is significantly cheaper, more accurate, more effective. So I think what we're seeing is the bridging of multiple communities happening. Traditionally, again, big medical companies and pharmaceutical companies were defining the technology in medical care, and now people are able to do that in their backyards and in their garages. DNA sequencing has become significantly cheaper and more effective. In fact, there was an X Prize, the Archon Genomics X Prize, that was designed to kind of move along kind of like that sequencing side of things. And if I recall correctly, the prize was actually cancelled in the end because the technology actually went faster than the actual X Prize. So from what I understand, all of that technology is available, and what the tricorder is doing is pulling it together into a usable device that anybody can use. I'm really excited about it. I think the tricorder has got such a tremendous impact, and think about the longer term impact of this as well. Think about like right now, first of all, in parts of the world where there is medical care, invariably doctors are being tied up because a lot of people go in and get checked out because they're worried that they may have something wrong with them, whereas in reality it's a pretty benign issue. So a good example of this is, you have a headache and a sore throat, you go and see the doctor, and the doctor's like, this is a common cold, just get some rest, take lots of fluids, and you'll be okay. So imagine if we have a device in which the doctors are only going to be really seeing the people that really need the attention. Like the tricorder will never replace doctors and physicians. Like that's not the goal of it. But the tricorder could make those doctors and physicians much more accurate. The other thing that's interesting about that as well is, a doctor can only store so much information in their head. And with the tricorder, if the tricorder kind of is connecting to Watson in the cloud, which is IBM's, AI technology, then you could store more information and more medicine, more information and more medical knowledge in the cloud than you could store in a doctor's head. And doctors have been proven to be wrong in many cases, right? So it reduces the issues around medical, medicinal or medical malpractice. It could have a profound impact on how doctors get and manage insurance, making it cheaper for them to get into the field. It could increase the quality of healthcare, but then also, if people using tricorders are volunteering to let certain aspects of their healthcare go back into the cloud, identifying and spotting pandemics and global pandemics could also be an interesting side of things as well. So it's not just you have like a cell phone type thing in which you can see what's wrong with your kid at 2 o'clock in the morning. There's this kind of like domino effect of all of these different impacts that this could have in the world. And that's what I find so exciting about this. And that's what a lot of the prize development goes into. So that's my kind of theory about how realistic the tricorder is going to be. From what I can tell, there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of potential in moving forward with that. Charles also asked a question about the community vision for X Prize, which I've already talked about, and how that will expand to local communities. One thing that I definitely want to do is to encourage local communities to connect to X Prize. Initially, I've been thinking about this within the context of individuals, but I'm also thinking about this within the context of teams. The challenge here, to be completely honest with you, is identifying what we want these folks to do, because in a 3 to 5 year X Prize, while the teams are kind of burying away and working on their prize, on their submission, what can our community be doing? And one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about recently is, I suspect a lot of teams are solving the same problems over and over again. Is that they, I imagine there's a kind of a lot of redundancy in individual teams because they're working privately, they're solving a lot of the same problems, and I wonder how we can tease that commonality out out into the public a little bit more, and then we can connect experts and community members to those questions. So, for example, imagine you've got an X Prize that's got a software component. A common problem in that software component may be something such as interaction design or UI design. I would love to explore ways in which we can bring in interaction and UI design experts into the mix for the betterment of all of the teams, and how we can do that in an open and transparent way. So armchair UI designers can kind of come in and provide input, and then it connects all of these different people together in different ways. So I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity in which we can do that there, and then that could connect to local communities as well. So C Profit also asked about, what about helping to define problems that are less well known? And I think that's one of the reasons why I think democratizing the prize ideas process is going to be important. Because right now, like a lot of the ideas for prizes, there's a booklet of a 2014 prize design booklet here at the office that kind of goes through like some of the prizes that are currently being explored and in development. So this is things like building an effective transporter, Alzheimer's and dementia, even things like weather control, things that relate to life sciences, that relate to oceans, things that relate to education. I think kind of bringing kind of the insight from the crowd into this there's a lot we can do there. But again, I need to map that out to what I don't want to do at X Prize is kind of show up and say, okay, this is how it's going to work, people. Because what will result in that is a bunch of people saying, hang on a second, new guy. So I need to kind of move at the right kind of pace in terms of how we bring these conversations in and what we start focusing on. Next question is from Michael Hall. How does X Prize compare to Canonical in terms of supporting remote workers and working from home employees? It's different. It's much less ingrained in the culture of X Prize than it is at Canonical. I mean, Canonical from day one was like, we are a remote working organization, and that's what we do. So from day one, there was a fundamental expectation that 90% of the workforce are going to be working from home. And I think that that's still the case at Canonical. It's a little different at X Prize because most people work in the office, right? So there's not that many people. I think there's about 4 or 5 of us who work remotely. So there are still some things that are kind of a little bit more ingrained into the office. But I think that X Prize as an organization is going to need to kind of be open to remote workers if they want to get the talent. I think all companies do, because it's just part and parcel of the working environment today. I mean, I am, as a whole, generally much more productive at home than I am in an office because, there's a lot more kind of people hanging around and chatting and whatever else, and then there's commute time and things like that. So I think that every company is going to have to be open to remote working. It's just part and parcel of how companies are working these days. And it was tough, like, even just 10 years ago to do this. Now with things like, Google Hangouts and video conferencing and discussion forums and social media and IRC channels and whatever else, HipChat and whatever else, there's no reason why people can't work effectively from remote locations. What makes it easier for me, of course, is that I live and work in the Bay Area. X Prize is based in LA, so if I do need to come to the office, it's like an hour. It's an hour and a half flight for me to get here, or an hour flight. One thing that I have been using is they have these things here called Beam, which are these telepresence robots. And basically what it is it's essentially, for those of you who've seen The Big Bang Theory, the episode where Sheldon decides he doesn't want to go out again, and it's just his face on the screen, and he's got like a t-shirt in front of it, and he kind of drives it around and talks to people. It's basically that without a t-shirt. So what it is, we have a meeting in like one of the rooms, and I'll reserve one of the beams, and what I can do is I can, sitting at home, I can ride around the office. So if I just want to go up and kind of have a conversation with someone at the desk, I can just use the beam to go and do that. But one of the things that's neat about doing this in meetings is if you're dialed in with a conference call, to a meeting and everybody else is there and you're not, people generally forget about you being on the phone. It's just the way things work. This is nothing specific to Canonical or XPRIZE or anyone else. This is just the way things tend to work. With this robot thing that's in the room that's kind of big and the screen is big, and you do honestly feel like that person's more in the room. It's a very interesting and slightly bizarre psychological impact of having like that person there. So I feel much more engaged in those conversations. In fact, I emailed Mark Shuttleworth and Jane Silver at Canonical and just said, you know what, I've been using these things. I think you should get a couple of them for the office, in London for Canonical, because they're really pretty tremendous. Johan asked a question, what do you hope and expect from RTM, the release to manufacture of the Ubuntu phone? One thing that's been interesting about leaving Canonical has been when you're pulled out of being in the factory for something, you start looking at things from a much more consumer perspective, right? So when I was at Canonical, I'd look at everything with Ubuntu from the perspective of one of the guys who's working on it. And I try to put myself into the position of looking at it from looking at it from a consumer perspective as well. But now I'm not kind of in those day-to-day meetings. I kind of look at things. I would like to think a bit more objectively than I did. I don't think this is anything specific to Canonical, because I think anyone who works on something is by definition biased, right? So whether you work at Red Hat, or whether you work at Microsoft or Apple or work at Canonical or Google, wherever, if you're involved in the development of something, you are by definition biased, even if you try not to be. Because it's all about information. You have more information about what's going on. And Canonical is a very information-rich environment. Like getting access to what people are doing and what's going on is easy. Teams are not siloed at Canonical. At least teams are a lot less siloed than most software companies. So I'm kind of looking at RTM from, frankly, just the brutal perspective of it's got to be a good frickin' phone, right? The device is not going to be successful and it's not going to work if people will only buy it because they want to support Ubuntu, right? For the device to be successful, for it to work, people need to want it. They need to want what's on it, right? If there's going to be some people out there, myself included, that are going to get it because it's Ubuntu, right? I want an Ubuntu phone, and it's because I believe in Ubuntu, and I believe Ubuntu is not just great software, but it's also a great vision, and I feel good about supporting that vision. But most people don't think like that. Most people don't give a crap about that kind of stuff. So I think that what's going to happen is that people are going to want to, the definition of success for Ubuntu on the phone is going to be becoming a desirable product that people want. And this is challenging because we have this chicken and egg situation, because the big ISVs will only ship if they will only port their apps over if they have volume, but then you need the apps to get the volume. So that's the difficult position. So I think that in answering your question, Johan, the most important thing is the thing's got to work, right? It doesn't have to be perfect, but it's got to work. I think the most critical thing about the Ubuntu phone is it's got to be rock solid stable, right? I'll never forget when Apple released the first iPad. And I talked a lot of trash about the iPad because I didn't think tablets made sense, and I was to be honest with you, I thought that tablets were ridiculous, and I was wrong about it. And I went and bought an iPad. In fact, the guy who convinced me about this was Chris Anderson, who used to be the editor at Wired. I had breakfast with him one morning, and Chris said, he showed me like the Wired digital edition. I just thought it was incredible. So I went and bought an iPad. And what blew me away, being a software guy, was that device, for a first-generation device, was completely bug-free. I honestly didn't see a single bug. And, with first generation devices and with first generation technology, typically you're kind of up against the timeline to try and get everything out there. I was absolutely astonished at how just rock solid that thing was. And I think that that's going to be the most critical thing for Ubuntu, is that it has to be rock solid. Like, if it's buggy and it, it kind of doesn't really kind of work, and Canonical are telling people, well, this is our first version, it's not going to wash with people. So the good news here is that, that my kind of last week with the team when I was in Malta, Mark Shuttleworth was very, very explicit to the team. He said, like, the focus here is quality. It's better for us to do fewer things and to do them well than to do more things and to do them not so well. So I believe that philosophy is shared at Canonical, absolutely. So that's what I'm kind of looking at from RTM. And I think Canonical's got, there's a good opportunity with scopes. Scopes are unique and interesting, certainly from an OEM perspective. I think it's still to be determined whether users are interested in that. I think users will be interested in it. I think it's that scopes are cool. And it's great seeing all the posts from Michael and other people about all the bits that are getting filled in, like the out-of-the-box experience and the indicators and push notifications and all these different pieces. So yeah, I'm really excited about RTM. I think it's all to play for with Ubuntu. What is going to be a bit more challenging for Ubuntu, of course, is that they're up against Firefox as well. And I used a Firefox. I mentioned this in Bad Voltage. I did this podcast, Bad Voltage, that some of you may have checked out, badvoltage.org. And Ak reviewed the Firefox phone, and he was over about 2 or 3 weeks back, and I got a chance to play with the Firefox phone. Honestly, the first Firefox phone I'd used, I thought was, to be completely honest with you, I thought it was rubbish. It was slow, it was laggy, it was buggy. It was awful. I mean, it was really awful. It was one of those geeks phones that came out at first. So I kind of had it in my head that Firefox OS was just kind of not very good. And I used this phone, and I was really impressed with what they'd done. It was a developer handset, and they made it very clear that there's lots to do. That this isn't the final release thing. But they had a pretty nice experience. They had all the necessary bits and pieces in there that you'd want. They had a reasonable range of apps in the store. And again, it was rock solid. I didn't find a single bug when I was using Firefox OS. So I think Ubuntu's got some stiff competition in terms of there is another kind of open source player in the market. The thing that has always been my concern about Firefox OS is twofold. First of all, I don't want to see a website portrayed as an app, right? I care about having native apps that are beautiful to use. I don't just want to use a web interface because they're just not as nice, and I think that's a limitation in their vision. And then the other thing is, I just don't think it's particularly beautiful to use. I mean, Firefox OS is very functional. To me, it reminds me of Android. It's very functional, and it works, and it gets you to where you need to go to. But it doesn't have that kind of luxurious feel, for example, that Apple are so good at, and I think Ubuntu has that. So I think that Firefox OS and Ubuntu are targeting two different markets, and I think both can be successful in their respective markets. Ubuntu's not going after the low end. And now Firefox has got competition in Android, in the cut-down Android thing. So, yeah, it's going to be a fun time watching how all of this plays out. But I'm super excited about the Ubuntu RTM. So, C Profit asked a question about when teams are fighting the same problems in building their submissions for X Prizes, they're doing so competitively, right? From what I understand, what happens is, teams we have multiple teams join to work on an X Prize, and then they basically just keep themselves to themselves. And that's what I'm looking to explore, is how we can maybe have a little bit more collaboration and how that works. And yeah, I think that some people will resist it, and I wouldn't require all teams to do this, but I think I'd like to create the community. I'd like to create a community that is a competitive advantage to teams, if you see what I'm saying. That's going to be my goal. Gareth asks, are you actually John O'Bacon? Are you really a human replicant that was developed as part of an X Prize prize? I believe that I am myself. Yeah. I believe it's me, but who knows? Um, okay. Any other questions? We've got about 10 minutes left. If there's no more questions, I can wrap up early. But any questions about anything? Remember, you can ask about if you want to ask about my views on X Prize or Ubuntu, or if you want to ask about my views on politics or open source or free software or whatever else. More than happy to answer any of your questions. More than happy to. I can see a ton of email has come into me by since I've been broadcasting. Sorry, no guitars here, obviously. No guitar playing on this particular session as well. Ian asks the question, have you got qualifications in relation to community management, or how did you get started? I don't have any qualifications in community management because there aren't any, from what I can tell. There is no community management degree or certification. Community management has been something that's evolved over time, and this kind of relates to the second part of your question, which is how did I get started? I remember very vividly the day that I got into community management because I just started. I just got into Linux, and my brother installed Slackware 96 on my computer from the back of a book that I bought because I had like a 10% discount. I used to work in a bookshop. So I started reading this book, and it was Slackware Unleashed, and it started talking about the community, the Linux community, and how it works, and how people get together and build this thing. And that was just, it unlocked something in me. I mean, it's funny. It's kind of a cliche that, some people struggle to figure out what they want to do with their lives, and people say, oh, you just haven't found the right thing yet. And that's such a cliche, but that really was the case with me. I mean, it wasn't that I was struggling to figure out what I wanted to do in my life at the time. At the time, all I wanted to do was play metal. But it unlocked something in me that just has generated like a lifelong fascination, which is, people working together to do things that are so much bigger than the individual. The first thing I thought when I read that was, so hang on a second, we have these people who are on the internet all over the world, and they work on something. They work on the same thing. Like, how do we have like 100 people all working on the same code? But they've made this thing that a single person could never make by themselves. They wouldn't have time. So that was just part and parcel of the open source community back then. This was in 1998. But since then, we've seen community become, the opportunity for community to become much bigger. So I got started by, frankly, just watching what other people were doing. I was on IRC, I was watching people who I respected. When I first got into Linux, I started learning certain people that I respected, people like Alan Cox. And, I was watching what people were doing in Debian, people like, Ian Murdoch, and Patrick from Slackware, what he was doing. I started getting interested in the GNOME project and then in KDE as well. So I was watching some of the early folks in KDE, people like David Foray and Stephen Kulo, and people like that, and obviously Miguel de Casa, Joe Shaw, Nat Friedman, Jeff Waugh, people like that who were very involved in those early projects, and watching how they were doing it. And I was just kind of like soaking up what people were doing, and then I started having ideas about how we can get people interested and inspired. And what happened was, the more that I kind of got involved, the more the community kind of like reinforced me and empowered me. Because when I started out, frankly, I just felt like an idiot who was trying to keep up. And the more I participated and my personal confidence started growing, the more I just thought, you know what, we can do anything we want. Like, the world is our oyster when we do it together. And that was what really kind of got me into community. And I think that when you really find your thing in life, you get to a point where your confidence becomes so ingrained in yourself that you just point where I was writing articles for magazines, Linux magazines, so my name was getting a little bit more recognition. So I go to conferences, people say, "Oh yeah, I know who you are," and that was, obviously empowering, and that was fun. But then that gave me an opportunity to have conversations with people who I probably couldn't have had beforehand. So I started doing interviews with fairly well-known open source people. I started getting to know fairly well-known open source people. So what happened was basically, for all intents and purposes, I got to a point where I just felt empowered to affect practical change. And that's how I feel today. Like, to me, it's not about, oh, can I do this? My view is, how do I do this? And maybe that's arrogant and maybe that's egotistical. I certainly don't think I'm an expert on this. I certainly don't think that I'm the best person in the world at this, and I certainly don't think I'm brilliant. But what I do feel like I have the ability to do is to make things happen. My view has always been, you know what, it might not work out. We may fail, but it's okay to fail forward, right? It's not a failure if we acknowledge the learning lesson from it. So I think that there isn't, I went through that kind of very, very kind of organic experience of learning about communities. And I felt like, frankly, I was lucky that I was in the right place at the right time, and that has had a profound impact on my life. Like, if it wasn't for that book, if it wasn't for Slackware Unleashed, I need to find the author and send him something nice. I can't remember who wrote it. If it wasn't for that book, I wouldn't be talking to you folks right now. I wouldn't have the lifestyle I have today, and I'm really happy. So my passion for community management these days is, I don't want it to be accidental for other people. I want it to be a much clearer path. I want people to think, I've heard about this community management thing, here's how I go forward and do it. And that's the reason why I wanted to write my book, and why I set up the communityleadershipforum.com and set up the Community Leadership Summit. I want to create the infrastructure and the on-ramp for people to build communities. So they've got a path forward in which they can learn from other people, and that it makes it easy for us to get involved in this. And I think the end result of this is that we grow the profession of community leadership, is that we have more people working professionally. That means more companies are hiring, and that means that there's more jobs. That means that more people write books. That means that more people run conferences. So all of these different pieces are kind of part of my overall strategy of how I want to build a really strong profession. And it's been so inspiring to see over the last 5 years that this is happening. Like, we're seeing this fantastic profession in community management growing. But there are challenges that relate to that. There's people who are not very good, who are kind of let the side down, and there's companies who are hiring people because their expectations are misaligned with the reality of community management. So, it's the same thing with technology. When technology starts out, it's always immature, right? Look at Linux, right? Back in the early days of Linux, it was immature. It kind of worked. There was a bunch of people who had ideas for what open source could do that in reality weren't within the parameters of what it really can do. We had lots of failures, lots of distros who tried to do things that didn't really work out. These days, it took us about 10 years, but these days, the open source model is pretty well understood, right? It's understood, like, what you can get out of the open source, what you need to put into it. And I think the same is happening with community management. I talk about this every year when I speak. We're in the period of a community management renaissance, where the maturity and the predictability of how community management works is getting better defined. So I think we're at a really exciting time, and that's one of the reasons why I'm excited about XPRIZE, is that you've got this kind of incentive model for how you solve the major challenges in the world. If we look at the major problems that we've seen in the world, things that relate to disease and famine and poverty and access to clean water and access to energy, and space exploration and renewable energy, all those different pieces, invariably, like, the market doesn't solve those problems, because the market doesn't have either necessarily the resources to kind of go out there and do that, or they don't understand where the market is. And in particularly the last 5 to 10 years, we've seen more and more companies targeting, like, what is known as the bottom billion, right? The people who are just struggling to just get by, the people who are living on next to nothing, every day, the people who need to have more children because they have children so they can go out and they can collect firewood so they can heat their house so they can cook. This is particularly detrimental for women. Women suffer the most here because in many cases, the women are expected to take care of the household and take care of the family. And there's so much involved in doing it because they don't have access to a lot of the resources that we have access to, that there is no time for education. There is no time for learning and bettering themselves. So this incentive model basically says, okay, here's a reason to start solving these problems, right? That's what I find so powerful about the incentive model. But when we connect the community to that, when we connect collaborative community to that model, I just think the sky's the limit. And that's what really is getting me jazzed about what we can do. A lot needs to happen. It's not going to be fast. It's going to take us a while to get there. But I just think the potential is tantalizing. So, and with that note, I'm going to wrap up because I think we're out of questions. Again, I just want to say a big thank you to everybody for joining me today. Again, I'm rebooting these Q&As. I don't have the luxury of posting to the Ubuntu social media networks to bring a ton of people in. So it's going to take me a little while to kind of grow an audience. And the people who were there right at the beginning, I just want to say a big thank you to everybody for joining me. I really want your feedback about how to make these sessions more interesting. So, would you like to have some more content, some more presentation content? Would you like me to have more Q&A or less Q&A? I'd really appreciate your inputs. If you can send me an email to Jono, Jono, @jonobacon.org. That's JONOBACON.org. I'd love to hear your feedback, to give me some ideas for things that we can do to make these sessions as generally interesting as possible, just so it's a good use of everybody's hour. So, all right, my friends, thank you for joining me. For those of you in the US, have a wonderful holiday weekend. Go and celebrate your independence. So, have a wonderful weekend. I'll see you all next week. Take care.